Welcome to A Slice of SEL, a podcast for educators about social emotional learning.
Welcome to A Slice of SEL. This is a podcast from the St. Croix River Education District. Rye, could you tell us where A Slice of SEL is available?
Of course, we are available on your favorite podcast apps, including YouTube.
We are the SEL services team from the St. Croix River Education District. I'm Courtney.
I'm Rye.
And I'm Nick. Last week, we began a series of episodes about educator self-care. And in last week's episode, we talked about chronic stress. So that's having too much stress in our bodies and our brains for most of the day or all of the day for a while. So weeks, months, multiple days. And we talked about that has effects on our overall health and even like long-term our mortality. And we didn't focus on that just to freak people out. We focused on that because we said self-care is not selfish. And we really believe that. Like, this isn't fluffy. This isn't like optional. We actually named the episode Self-Care is Not a Band-Aid. Like, this is something we need to take really seriously because stress, too much of it for too long, is really not good for us. And it's incredibly important to focus on taking care of ourselves and to take that seriously.
Yeah, and last week in our episode, we talked a little bit about splitting self-care up into the wellness wheel. So that was just separating things into different buckets. So there's like our emotional well-being, our social wellness, physical, occupational wellness, and et cetera.
And this week, we're going to really zero in on emotional wellness. And we're going to talk about tools for managing stress and helping ourselves weather the storm. I threw that phrase in there because I've heard that phrase a couple times in the last week or so, and I really like it, that visual of like weathering the storm of what we're going through right now and helping us as educators to be resilient. So, I mean, we're facing a lot of challenges, a lot of changes, but being able to cope with those and bounce back.
So this week, we are going to talk about 5 tools to help your body chill out.
But first, before we get into it, let's talk about what's filling our bucket this week, you guys. So for me, it's been a stressful week. So we're still in this pandemic, and then on top of that, all this election stuff. But being able to reach out to people and doing some meme sharing and positive texting has been really helpful. What about you, Rye?
Well, I could easily go with my record-setting November temperature, but I'm not. We had a due process networking night last night for the SCRED districts, and we just had a really great turnout. So seeing all the educators come together for some networking and getting some due process paperwork done and some questions asked, it was just really so nice to see the breakout rooms full and people really utilizing the virtual space that we offered. So what about you, Nick?
Well, one of mine was going to be a couple examples I've seen of just educators coming together and really helping each other out. But yeah, I'm just glad to hear you voice that, Rye. But one of mine, I just changed at the last minute too. I think it's so important to be connected with people and have your support network during this time. And there are 2 female friends who walk on the same trail in the park path that Christina and I walk pretty much every day after work when we're walking our dog Mila. And we see these 2 friends, and they walk together, I think, every day at the same time. And I think they go all the way around, which is like almost an hour walk. And they're just like always like best friends talking to each other that whole time. And it's just so lovely to see people doing that. And then every time they see our dog Mila, she like runs up to them and is like all excited to see them. So it's just one of the highlights of my day.
Awesome. All right, so now we're going to shift to our main topic, and we are going to break down 5 tips for helping our bodies chill out. We want to recommend that we only focus on one at a time. Like, we have a lot of them, but if we try to use all of them, it's hard to make that one stick. So Nick, why is that?
Well, yeah, we wanted to talk about self-care, and there are just a few aspects of it I think we wanted to emphasize. Like, balance is one. This came up a little bit in our last episode when Rye was bringing up, like, it's okay to eat like some Cheetos. Comfort food is important. especially during stressful times, like we need that, but also like our long-term health is important. So like it's about balance. And then it's individual and kind of custom to you. Like self-care is going to look different for every person. It's not like a one size fits all deal. So like Krav Maga martial arts class might be a big self-care thing for someone. And then like water aerobics might be something really valuable to someone else, like Courtney.
I love water aerobics.
And habits is the third thing we wanted to emphasize. And I know we voiced this last week, but it's really better to pick one thing that you know you can stick to, that you can make part of your routine, rather than like hopping around. So a nice thing about habits is that they decrease our need to use our willpower. And after a certain point, if it's a good habit and it's been around for a while, like we don't need to keep making that choice, or it's a lot easier to make. It's just like something we do. So the first tip we're going to talk about is deep breaths. And don't turn the podcast off. This one can feel a little bit cliche, but maybe it's just for the three of us because we work with, SEL and behavior support in schools so much. Maybe it's just cliche for us. Had a lot of like middle school boys roll their eyes at us when we talk about this. But deep breaths are really important. And they are one of the most effective ways. We talked last week about how your body lights up with this stress cocktail when you feel upset or anxious or nervous or angry. Like all these things happen in your body, your breath, your muscles, and breathing like slow, deep breaths with your diaphragm, really opening up your lungs, is one of the best ways, if not the best way, to slow down that process and start putting the brakes on and reversing it. But that said, like, you don't just have to take these big, deep breaths when you're about to lose it. Like we're at that critical point and we need to like slam on the brakes or else we're going to get in a collision. I've used it many times in the last week or so when I was just feeling off, or like I was struggling or just a little uncomfortable. Like I'd get out of a meeting and I knew that my body was just like tense, and I would just find a moment to take like a couple, I didn't even count them, like just a couple deep breaths, really inconspicuous. I wasn't like counting in my head. I was just knowing that I was taking some deep breaths, and then I just moved on. And I could tell my body was a little bit calmer. My muscles were a little bit more relaxed and my head got a little more clear. And that's really what it's all about. Like my Apple Watch, for example, gives me reminders many times in a day of you should take a deep breath right now. And I gotta admit, I ignore like 90% of them. And I know I'm not alone, because this is
I do too.
this is almost I think it's a meme I've seen on Instagram and Twitter a couple times of like people posting their bossy Apple Watch telling them to breathe and being like, that ain't gonna cut it right now. But it's really like we said, self-care is individual. And I do every once in a while take my, tech's advice and use the little app on the Apple Watch. But really what I do more often is just try and notice when my muscles are tense like that and I'm keyed up, and just take a couple informal deep breaths. And that works for me. And you're going to hear, especially if you teach this in schools to kids, you're probably familiar with different breathing routines around numbers. So 4, 7, 8 breathing or box breathing. Those are cool. And it's nice to have those routines, especially when you're younger. And, our younger kids, if they don't have those routines, might say, yeah, I'm deep breathing. It goes like this. I don't know if that comes through on the audio on the podcast, but like those aren't deep breaths. Those are quick little shallow breaths. We're not helping out there. But like we're adults, we know how to take like slow, deep breaths. And like I said, when I do it in my normal routine, it's just this little ritual where I'm not really counting, and that's fine. It works for me. So whatever works for you. It doesn't have to be really formal. It doesn't have to be an app. Just whatever is working. If you, before a meeting, for example, that is probably going to be tough, taking like 2 or 3 deep breaths just so you can settle your nervous system a little bit. That works. And that works for me personally. And then on the other end, coming out of like a difficult meeting or a difficult class, taking a couple deep breaths. I know I did that countless times at work as a school psych last year. I was dealing with crises and a lot of really stressful multitasking situations. And I really had to find short little moments to, walk away from a situation and take a couple deep breaths. So really great tool, but it just has to, do what works for you, make it fit.
And the second tip we're going to talk about is tensing and relaxing your muscles. Now, I actually use this one a lot. Basically you just tense and relax your muscle groups in a certain order. What I do is I start with my toes and I work my way up my body because I feel like if I separate myself from my head for a minute, that just makes me feel better. So I start at the bottom of my body and work my way up. You can see this on many hospital websites. It helps with stress and also sleep. I find if I do my muscle tensing, or if I am not comfortable in bed, if I sit up and kind of go through it and stretch out a little bit, it makes me sleep better. It's helpful to have a recording to follow, and we have one of those available on our SEL website. And we also have a poster on the website as well. I've actually been using this one a lot lately. I have been having a lot of problems sleeping. I think it's just the climate of the world right now. I also notice when I'm driving, I get really uncomfortable and I can get kind of on the verge of like panicky. So if I just start to like tense and relax myself, I calm down, and then obviously implement the breathing with it too. But I think that this one specifically helps me a ton.
And it has a lot to do with that muscle tension that we talked about. Like when the stress hormones are in your body, your muscles are going to tense up. So it is on a lot of hospital websites. If you Google this, they all tend to have pages about this. And it's for stress management, but also I think for chronic pain, I'm seeing it a lot because they ask questions like, are you feeling tense in your neck or your shoulder muscles? And then they start to walk through why this is an important thing to try and do.
The next one is just to pace or go for a walk. You guys were talking about those Apple Watch reminders, and one of the ones that I ignore is the time to get up, time to take steps. That might actually be for the physical goals. It also does help clear the body and or help the body, and also helps you clear your head. So you might notice that things often make more sense after you are able to get up and take a walk. I can't imagine, like you were explaining with those two friends who get out and walk together every day for an hour. I can't imagine the sense of peace and ways that could clear my head if I just had that extra time with a friend to talk and walk. So creating a habit is also important of when you are gonna get your steps in and go for a walk and clear your head. Maybe you have time over your lunch break or after work. Here in Minnesota, we have some factors that might affect some of those options, such as the weather and the sunlight, in those months, those long months from November to...
No, Rye, why would the weather affect our ability to take walks in Minnesota?
It's funny that I got this one and I love talking about the weather. So
I was so good at doing this in the spring, and now like I just don't have the motivation after the day's done. The sun's almost down. I'm like, I can't.
Yeah, and that's why we got to think, bundling up and going out in the snow in Minnesota is, we all live here for some kind of crazy reason. And like we do that. We're robust, resilient people. But on like if there's like crazy storms going on outside, it's going to be pretty hard to convince yourself to take that walk. I know one thing we've done in our house is we got a really cheap used treadmill off, like Craigslist, Facebook groups. There's places you can get them for really cheap. And we just have that in our basement. So like if there's a meeting that is going on and you can like participate on your phone, or just like watching TV on your phone, or like if you put a TV near the treadmill, you can just like walk inside. And we don't use it for running really at all. It's just for walking.
Right.
But you brought up those friends again, who I see walking every day, Rye. One thing to mention with self-care is like, it reminds me of this episode of The Office, the American Office show, where they're talking about like self-care in the office, and they're having all these recommendations like, hey, you should get up maybe once every hour and like not look at your screen. And then for your posture, you should get up, once every hour. And then like Michael Scott is walking through and he's just like, well, that's like a lot. That adds up to like half an hour every hour. And then one guy's like, take them at the same time. So, so those friends who are walking, like this helps their body, just like that rhythm of walking, and like you said, it clears your head, but they're also talking to each other, and that relationship, like they're saying like what's going on in their lives and how they're feeling and getting that all out. We're going to talk more about that in another episode, but like I see people taking walks and just like have their earpieces in, talking to a friend or family member. Like you can do this stuff at the same time.
Mhm. All right, the fourth tip we're going to talk about is using the diving response. So this is usually a strategy for people who have panic attacks. Our body has this automatic reflex where our heartbeat goes down because the body thinks it needs to slow our system down. So the way we do this is submerging our face in cold water. Like that's the best way, but we can splash it with water too. That also works.
Yeah, and I've had multiple students who like they start to feel like they're escalating, they start to hyperventilate, and they would like walk to the bathroom and just like, yeah, splash their faces with water. So if you're wondering like, where am I going to find like a swimming pool or a bathtub in a school where I work, like, yeah, it can be like, you can just make it work. Like a water fountain can even work. And like we said, like this is typically recommended more for people who have those panic attacks that are just debilitating, and you just need to get in quickly and like shut that down. And this can help do that. But it's just cool to be aware of. I remember when I learned about this the first time, I just didn't know about it. And it's called the mammalian diving reflex. I hope I pronounced mammalian nicely. Your face nerves can detect like when you're about to be underwater, and it just kind of clicks with this reflex. It's pretty cool. Tip number 5, and this is our last one, is sensory tools. And like examples that are relevant to adults are like a stress ball or a weighted blanket. That's what we're talking about here. When I said sensory tools, you might have thought like fidgets, and then your brain goes to fidget spinners, and then you start to have this these memories of like me, maybe all these stressful conversations that we had when fidget spinners were a big issue, very big distractor in classrooms a year or so ago. But yeah, we're talking about this from an adult perspective, and really like there are a lot of different kinds of hand sensory tools, fidgets, stress balls, like we said, is a really common one that I've seen in a lot of different offices over the years. And it's just that repetitive hand motion, and it just kind of helps you reconnect with your body and get a little bit distracted from like the stress you're having. It's kind of like going for that walk that Rye talked about. It's just kind of like a repetitive motion that just helps with your stress a little bit. And I know I've been in a lot of meetings where if there's like a bucket of fidget tools in the middle of the table, I just love taking like one of those bendy ones and just kind of like twisting it around while I talk.
My favorite are those little like stretchy, scrunchy ones that go over your fingers and they kind of like poke into your finger. It looks kind of like a slinky that's just connected. I don't know, it puts a lot of pressure on my skin, and I just love it. It's obnoxious, but I love it.
Well, yeah, another one we just wanted to address is weighted blankets, because we are talking about educator self-care for adults. And you've probably seen the ads for these if you haven't seen them in person or just heard of them. This comes from work with people with autism on the autism spectrum. And it has to do with sensory integration issues. So like that pressure, and I've worked with students where that was part of their calming routine, is having a weighted blanket or a weighted vest, and it helps. I'm not an expert in autism, so I can't really explain in detail why it helps, but it does. The research for, what you might call neurotypical people around this and how it affects stress isn't conclusive. So I hesitate to like really strongly recommend this one from just a scientific perspective, because there isn't really a whole lot of conclusive evidence that this works really well. But that said, like there's a lot of people out there on Amazon reviews saying like, this really worked for me, this really helps me calm down, this helps me sleep. And if you try it out, they are kind of a little bit expensive, depends on what your frame of reference for expensive is. But if you're interested in those, it might be worth a shot. Some people, it might just be a placebo, like a sugar pill effect, but I know I've been interested before, because I know I've like, put on one of those sensory blankets for a couple seconds, and it does seem like it might be nice.
Last weekend, we redecorated our bedroom, and I was shopping at Target for our new bedroom decor or whatever. And I was just so impressed with how many options there were for weighted blankets, just even at Target. I mean, there was different weights and sizes in the kids aisle and in the adult aisle, like next to the comforters and stuff. So selling them at Target, they are in a pretty reasonable price point, and everyone loves a good weighted blanket. So when I was teaching, I felt like the only time I heard that term was when I was working with my occupational therapist, programming for some of those students with autism. And I remember, trying to get one. The price tag was just like, no, sorry, we can't order it, not in our budget, sort of thing. But so now with the recent trend, I feel like they are definitely more reasonable and accessible.
Yeah. Yep. So guys, we're going to shift to takeaways. And just to recap, our 5 tips were deep breathing, muscle relaxation, taking a walk, using your diving response, and using sensory tools like stress balls or maybe weighted blankets. And we really recommended, don't run out and try and do all 5 of those things. Probably try and start with one and just think about which one you think makes the most sense to you right now, and what could fit into your routine and what might become a habit for you. We talked about, every one of us, we highlighted different habits that we're trying to keep and make sure that they work for us.
We hope these tips were helpful for you. We just wanted to thank you for spending time with us today. Make sure to subscribe on your podcast app. If you are on YouTube, click the bell so that you're notified when new episodes are released each week. We'll see you next time when you come back for another slice of SEL.
Thank you guys. Have a good one.
Thank you. Bye.
Bye.